You're tuned in to the Bleav in Arizona podcast. Hello, Bear Down Believers, and welcome into the show. I'm your host, Matt Reynoldson. We'll be getting together a few times a week to talk everything U of A here on the Bleav in Arizona podcast. And I have my first guest today. And of course, it's a guest I know very well. Wanted to get the dream team back together for this one. My former coworker, Jenna Fink. She's at KVOA News for Tucson, the NBC station serving Southern Arizona. And she's ramping up towards football season, towards basketball season, and the entire school year, like the rest of us are here in Bear Down Nation. And Jenna, what has this July been like for you? Because before we get to all the Arizona things, it's been a little unique because we're ramping up for the Olympics, and obviously NBC has the Olympics. So what's this month of coverage been like for you, just getting ready to see these Wildcats compete in Paris?
Well, it's been a lot of fun, first of all. And like you just mentioned, there are a lot of Wildcats, either former or current, who will be competing in Paris, which is just an extra special tie for us here covering the Paris Olympics. There are, I think I had counted upwards of like 13 or 14 athletes, 3 coaches that are competing with ties to the U of A. So it makes it a lot of fun. I've had the opportunity to get to speak to them. We're doing a one-to-watch Olympic series. So every week I've been able to talk to an athlete or coach who has ties. So, those are all on our website, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch them compete and hopefully take home some medals.
What have been some of those really fun stories or fun things that maybe don't rise to the level of normalcy, right? This is something that kind of raises your eyebrow. Obviously, Chase Budinger is one of them, a former Arizona basketball player going to beach volleyball and earning a trip to the Olympics to wear the stars and stripes. But what have some other stories been, maybe from some of those Olympic sports, the traditional Olympic sports, if you will, that you've been able to uncover and see, okay, this is the life dream that they had to go represent their countries at the World's Games?
Well, first, Chase Budinger, that is just a crazy story for him to go kind of like a 180 in terms of sports. But the interesting thing for him was kind of how he adapted his body to go from basketball to sand and beach volleyball. So yeah, of course, that was a huge story that drew national attention. But there were a couple other ones that really stood out to me. One of them was Ralph Daleiden. He's a swimmer. He's a current student at the U of A representing Luxembourg. And he almost quit swimming when he was younger. I mean, he had a coaching change. He was having some, kind of troubles with that. Found a new coach, went back to an old coach, kind of a saga to kind of get back right in the pool. But now he's representing Luxembourg. I Bleav he does 100 free. I could be totally wrong on that. I've done so many of these that they kind of mix together, but he was definitely one of them. Another one that stood out was Gia Trevisan. She is a track, and she came from Cal to the U of A, worked with Francesca Green, who is the relay and sprints coach. And she's the one that actually convinced Gia to go out for the Olympics. She represents Team Italy. And she said without the U of A coach, she never would have thought to even try to use her dual citizenship to represent Team Italy. So a lot of stories like that with athletes that we don't necessarily hear about. Of course, there's Delaney Schnell, the diver, who's from Tucson, from the U of A, who is going back to her second Olympics. I've talked to her a couple of times as well. She's wonderful. But some of those athletes we don't necessarily hear about in their normal time of competition during the school year because we're so focused on, basketball and football and all those other sports that now they get their chance to shine in Paris. And we've had the opportunity to tell their stories, which is really cool.
You're a natural with the segue because that brings us right into the basketball and football talk. Before we get to that, though, I do want to plug your content. All those Olympic stories, all of those wonderful features. You can see those over on KVOA.com. Jenna doing a great job over there. But you mentioned basketball and football, and that's what we talk about. I mean, it really does run the cycle here, and I think we've enjoyed our coverage so much when it comes to that, and just being on the front lines, being on the field, being on the court, asking the questions in press conferences. And we've gotten an opportunity to do that in this July. And we got an opportunity to see what Arizona is bringing into this new league in Big 12 Media Days. Early in July in Las Vegas, being able to stand on the stage with all 16 teams and say, this is the stamp that Arizona is going to make on this conference. So hearing from Conference Commissioner Brett Yormark, head football coach Brent Brennan, Noah Fafita, Tedero McMillan, Gunnar Maldonado, and Jacob Manu, what were some of your biggest takeaways for how Arizona presented the program, this new program under Brent Brennan, at Big 12 Media Days?
I think they presented themselves really well. I think, one thing that stood out to me, especially about Coach Brennan, is he understands the expectations that are centered around Arizona football this year. He knows, he has to kind of continue a legacy, not only from this past year, but also the legacy of Dick Tomey, people that he has looked up to when he was a grad assistant back here back in 2000. So I think he understands kind of the legacy to uphold with Arizona football, but he also isn't making any promises. He doesn't buy into necessarily the hype of all the preseason awards. That's something, I had a chance to sit down one-on-one with him. He said, preseason awards don't mean anything. It's the postseason awards that means something. And I think that kind of, he knows, his team needs to put in the work, show that they deserve the recognition that they're getting in the preseason. So that's one of the big things that really stood out to me about Coach Brennan. That's been consistent really since he took over the head coaching job. Something that stood out to me about Brett Yormark, the commissioner, his aggressiveness in terms of his plans for the Big 12, how he wants to continue to see the conference grow, expanding outside of the U.S. He said they wanted to try Big 12 Mexico and get that launched in women's soccer and baseball. So, he's thinking 2 steps ahead, in terms of not only just conference realignment and getting new teams. He's added 8 teams in the 2 years he's been here. But just thinking about unique ways to get more eyes, more interest on the Big 12.
Yeah, let's discuss that a little bit. Why is it so important at this stage to be aggressive in expansion, aggressive in new media? Because I heard something very interesting that Brett Yormark highlighted about the Big 12 conference, and it was that this conference has more Twitter/X followers than any other league in the country. So they're obviously focused on new media. But what gets them the media rights deal in 2030 is a competitive product, appealing teams, and appealing matchups. And a lot of that turns into peering over the fence a little bit, maybe looking at Florida State and Clemson, who are suing for grant of rights with the ACC right now. The ACC could dissolve because of this. Now, the other day, Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, pushed back on that, said this league is much more than one school or 2 schools. But, if Florida State and Clemson, the backbone of that conference, leave, it could be everybody else left picking up the scraps. And if the Big 12 is ambitious and aggressive in that pursuit, they could end up on top. So with all of that conference realignment talk, before it even probably happens this year, or it happens next year, or even 2 years down the road, or 3 years down the road, depending on how these legal situations go. But how important is it to be aggressive in this climate? And how did Brett Yormark present that vision?
Well, it's very important because, with conference realignment, things can change so quickly, as we saw with the Pac-12. Pac-12 Media Day went from, oh, we're working on a deal, we'll let you know, to a couple weeks later, the whole conference was, basically dissolved. So I think, if you're not thinking ahead, you get behind, so to speak. I don't know. I think there's a better phrase for that than what I said, but I think him looking at naming rights, him looking at new TV broadcast windows. He mentioned this. He said there were so many things that you're competing for on a Saturday, on a Sunday, just during the weekend with sports between the NFL and all this different stuff. He was saying they were exploring some new TV times. He didn't really get into specifics about when that might be, but we've seen Arizona playing several Friday night games this fall. So, that could be something they're exploring there. So I think, it's very important for them to keep pushing the envelope to see kind of, again, we don't know what's conference realignment is going to look like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. So it's important, to keep pushing it.
We also heard from Arizona Athletic Director Desiree Reed-Francois, who is new to kind of this conference transition thing. Missouri obviously went from the Big 12 to the SEC circa 2011, 2012 range. And that was one of the big shakeups that was the original detriment to the Big 12, with Nebraska leaving for the Big 10, Colorado leaving for the Pac-12, and Missouri and Texas A&M leaving for the SEC. The Big 12 obviously survived. They're on good footing. But all that to say, Desiree Reed-Francois, between her time as an athletic director at UNLV and her time as an athletic director at Missouri, has never really experienced a conference transition or anything like this. Did her comments enlighten your perspective on her experience of how she's going to tackle this move and how she's ready for the challenges that come throughout all of this and a lot of those challenges you just mentioned?
She, in the opportunity that I had to hear from her, in Las Vegas, she, acknowledged the challenges that come with this conference realignment, with transition and everything, but she's very opportunistic. She saw this as a really great opportunity for the U of A and for the Tucson fans. That's something she really emphasized. She emphasized ticket sales for football are at the highest, number they've been for the U of A since 2018. So she said she saw this at a really good opportunity for Tucson, for the U of A fan base, for U of A to kind of, go head to head with the fan bases of these other teams in the conference, because these are teams that care about their programs, care about football, care about basketball. And I think she sees that as a really great opportunity for the U of A, fan base, especially, to take advantage of that and kind of find a good home, a good niche in that.
You're watching and listening to the Bleav in Arizona podcast. Matt Reynoldson, joined by my guest and former co-worker, Jenna Fink. And Jenna, you again transitioned to it extremely well there. You got a knack for this with football talk. We're coming up on fall camp here in Tucson, and there is a lot of excitement. I would even go towards recently unprecedented excitement, probably the most anticipated season in maybe a decade for Arizona football. And we see this incredible amount of momentum. And it all kind of boils down, before we talk about the stuff on the field, it all kind of boils down to that Saturday in McHale in the winter, where Noah Fafita and Tedero McMillan and all their teammates come out and they play the "We're Not Leaving" on the video board. You were there. I mean, that was an electric moment. How much did that encapsulate what this fan base and how much this fan base is going to embrace this team and how much excitement there is around the football program right now?
I think it was everything. I still get chills thinking about that. I went back and watched it again because I was putting it in one of the pieces that I did on Big 12 Media Days, and just how loud it was. I mean, we hear McHale get really loud for basketball, obviously, but
Sure.
that was something else. I think that just showed, I think the Tucson U of A fan base values loyalty. And, when we see Tedero McMillan, Noah Fafita, and so many other Wildcats that day pledge their loyalty to the school, to Brent Brennan, I think that speaks volumes. And that's been one of the biggest momentum, that's been that they've been riding that momentum through spring camp, through the summer. And, now they're hoping to build on it fall camp and as the season goes on.
They really have. And Brent Brennan talked a little bit about it at Big 12 Media Days, of him having those discussions for the first time with his players, with his new players coming in after Jedd Fisch's departure in January. And he said, a lot of players came in and talked to me, and he answered a question at the podium and said, I didn't talk to them. I didn't pitch them anything. I listened and told them what I'm about. This guy, we've both sat down with him so much. Brent Brennan is so authentic, and he feels like the perfect culture fit to come in and keep this roster of player leaders together. But not only that, foster future player leaders. Say, this is the example. This is your number 11, Noah Fafita. This is your number 4, Tedero McMillan. This is your man in the middle on defense, Jacob Manu. These are guys that lead by example. They're vocal. They're not arrogant. And I think we saw at Big 12 Media Days them come off as so authentic. What is the culture? This is a really overarching question right now.
Yeah.
It's a lot to put on the spot, but What is the culture of this Arizona football team right now?
I think it's what Brent Brennan has preached since pretty much he got here, which is family. I mean, he
Mhm.
himself has ties, has connections to the U of A. He was here, he worked here while, and had family who attended here. So for him, coming back here was truly like a homecoming to him. And I think he's kind of helped share that with his teammates. And I liked what you meant. You mentioned the conversation. We knew he had conversations with
Right.
the players, right? I mean, but we didn't know kind of how they worked until he was at the podium at Big 12 Media Days. And he said he spent 2 hours with 25 players organized by Fafita.
Mm.
And he just answered any and every question, from what color cleats are we going to wear to what are your values as a football coach? So it was everything. And I think his openness, um, his willingness to, just to express what he wants to do with this program kind of helped, like you said, the genuineness of the program. And I think that culture has kind of continued. I love that they were all wearing lays at
No.
media
Yep.
day. Tedero McMillan, Jacob Manu, Brent Brennan, and Noah Fafita. I think they were all wearing lays. Maybe all of them were too. I think actually
Yeah.
everyone that was there. But I think that also kind of is a testament to the culture as well.
I mean, there's so much unity, and it's so
Mhm.
easy for the fans to get behind. But
But
as a Nebraska grad, I am used to talking about winning the offseason. Arizona has clearly won the offseason. Interest is at an all-time high. There's so much momentum for the program, and
right.
there's so many great characters and individuals on this team to get behind. But it's still a transition, and
Mhm.
players need to learn a new system. Noah Fafita, the great quarterback that he is, still needs to adjust to helmet communication. There
Mhm.
are new pieces on offense. Jonah Coleman is now at Washington, a stable of new running backs, new receivers behind Tedero McMillan and Montana Lamonius Craig. Let's start with the offense. What does the offense need to show you in fall camp to say, okay, they're going to come into the Big 12 and be ready to play at this pace and ready to score at this pace to keep up with a traditionally prolific offensive league?
One thing too that you mentioned about the adjustment, I think before we get into that, the interesting thing
Mhm.
too, Brennan said, was that they didn't switch up so much of the terminology
Yeah.
because they wanted the players to kind of know it and then have the 12 coaches learn it rather than have the players learn it. So I thought that was interesting. But I think the offense, we need to see who steps up besides Tedero McMillan and Montana Lamonius Craig at wide receiver. There are several
Yeah.
guys who have come in who have impressed Brent Brennan. He said that there could be several players, that step up at the slot position. Who's going to replace Jacob Cowing, who was so productive for Arizona a year ago? The running back room, like you mentioned, lost Jonah Coleman. You have Michael Wiley, who graduated. So now you're going to have what's likely, maybe a running back by committee.
Yeah.
When you have several, you have Quali Conley, Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, several different guys who can, become that number one running back. But we need to see kind of who steps up during camp, or if they maybe do keep that committee.
It feels like it'll be a committee as well
Right.
at wide receiver. I mean, you mentioned
Mhm.
T-Mac and Montana Lamonius Craig, but Noah Fafita said at Big 12 Media Days he was hyping up Malachi Riley a little
Yep.
bit. Obviously, Raymelo Murphy, the transfer in, is going to be a high value target. It feels like they could go 5 or 6 deep at wide receiver, but pass catching is, as you mentioned, kind of a committee thing. And they're replacing a lot at tight end as well with Tanner
Mhm.
McLaughlin. Is this Kean Burnett's job? Is this Roberto Miranda's job? How do we see the whole pass catching picture coming together for this offense?
Yeah, I think that's what we're gonna see an answer of in fall camp. Both of them had
Yeah.
a good spring camp. I remember Coach Brennan praising both of them. We saw that little bit of their action in the spring game, but I think that fall camp is going to be a chance for us media members and also fans who come out to it to kind of see how those tinkerings kind of work with who might get more reps or not.
Now, obviously, discussing the offensive line isn't the sexiest conversation for a podcast or for video podcasts. But, it feels like we have to touch on it because this is the group that sort of makes or breaks the Arizona offense.
Right.
And with the group they have coming back, Jonas Savanea is probably the guy that has the best pro prospects. You have other good pieces back on that offensive line. Josh Baker at center, Wendell Moe returning all conference player. But the real question is the guy they lost at left tackle, Jordan Morgan, the Marana grad, first round draft pick to the Green Bay Packers. They have to replace that. And right now it feels like Raymond Polito has the inside track to get there. But is this his job to win or lose, or is this sort of an open competition for new O-line coach Josh Oglesby as we start fall camp?
I think that's an interesting question. And that's, the big question that they'll have to address is who's going to be the best fit in there. But Polito does have the experience already played in Arizona's offensive line. Of course, it's going to be a different, it's a different coach now. So it's a whole different thing. But he did have that experience. He did have some injuries at the beginning of the season. So that's something he's got to stay healthy. But that is something that, could be his job to win. But also, like you said, it is the most important position. So they're going to make sure that Noah Fifita is protected at all costs. But Fifita did mention how great it is to have the other four there because it helps with the transition so much. It helps with the transition in a new coaching staff. It helps with the transition to the Big 12 even. Just having continuity up front helps make his job a lot easier for him, for the running backs, for everybody.
Now, Jenna, you know this. I get a lot of my takes from Twitter. I saw something a few months ago that was like, I want my offensive coordinator to be a rocket scientist sitting there drawing up plays on a napkin in the basement. And I want my defensive coordinator to be an old man who's retired, crazy defensive coordinator who's been sitting on a beach for a while. Now, Dwayne Aquino wasn't sitting on a beach, but he fits the crazy experienced defensive coordinator role. Obviously, Arizona fans are not new to Dwayne Aquino, but you've talked to him. I've talked to him. How much does his experience, his expertise on the defensive side of the ball, how can that create this next wave of good Arizona defenders and good Arizona defenses so they don't miss a beat on that side of the ball?
He's such a good defensive mind. I mean, like you said, we've both had a chance to talk to him, and just listening to him, the way he talks about football is so unique and so interesting. So it draws you in. Like, you just want to sit there and listen to him talk for like an hour. I think just the knowledge, the experience, the passion for Arizona that he has so many strong players coming back, Traden Stukes, Jacob Manu, those players kind of can help even the young up and comers, the players that are either just transferred in or, are rising up through the ranks, having them who believe so strongly in Dwayne Aquino and what he does, I think only helps this program as well.
I have questions a little bit on the defensive side, though. This group is really strong, brings back a lot of great athletes. Takario Davis is projected as a potential first-round draft pick at corner, so he's obviously your CB1. He's got to catch the ball this year, not just drop interceptions, but he's in the right place at the right time.
Right, he'll get there. He'll get there.
Yeah, he'll get there. But I mean, you've got Traden Stukes on the back end. You've got other Gunnar Maldonado at safety. I mean, other guys that are so good on that back end. And then your man in the middle, Jacob Manu, he's wearing the green dot. He's calling the plays for the defense. He has the helmet communication for the defense this year. But there are legitimate questions with all the defensive line transfers out and all the defensive line transfers in. They have got to figure out who their best six or seven guys are to rotate that group in. And they've got to figure out pass rushers as well. Taylor Upshaw was really darn good last year there. Can Justin Flo be that guy? I have questions within the front seven, and it doesn't really center on that middle linebacker spot. Do you share some of those same concerns?
No, it's fair. It's fair for sure. I mean, and last year, Jedd Fisch, one of their biggest focuses was bringing in size on the defensive line. I think he said like the amount of size they brought in was like I think he said like a water crocodile or something like that. He made some silly comparison to how much, bigger, like stronger, bigger guys they brought in on that defensive line. Bill Norton, one of them. I mean, he was a huge loss for Arizona for him to go to Texas. So I think it's fair that you do have questions about who's going to step up. But they do have some returning talent who maybe could take that next step. Tai Uyonglele, one that stood out to me. Coach Brennan has had very positive things to say about him. Kevon Darton came in from Syracuse. Chubba Mai transferred in. So there's a lot of talent that we're kind of waiting to see how they might fit in, like you said.
Yeah, and Tyler Smith too, another guy that on the defensive line transferred in from San Jose State that was projected really highly in the PFF rankings. But of course, those don't really matter till you get on the field. We'll talk to Brent Brennan here coming up on next Tuesday in his media luncheon availability before the start of fall camp next Wednesday. So plenty of exciting things happening on the football field. And of course, it's July, so we can't get through July without talking a little bit of Arizona basketball. We heard from Trey Townsend for the first time last week, but we've learned about this Arizona roster that they are going to pull in transfers, and they're going to pull in guys that can be immediate impact players. Arizona pulled 3 in this year. Obviously, I mentioned Trey Townsend, the Horizon League Player of the Year, the power forward from Oakland, but obviously also Anthony Del Orso, the Campbell transfer wing, who averaged 20 points per game last year. And then Tobe Awaka, he is from Tennessee, a power forward, kind of that that rebounder, hit you on the glass type of guy, strong defender. What about these 3 transfers do you feel like fits in well with this Arizona roster, especially now that we know this Arizona basketball team has so much production coming back with Jaden Bradley, KJ Lewis, and Caleb Love all returning to the fold?
Well, I think Trey Townsend could very well be a starter. I think he fits right in. I think one thing that stood out about his press conference was just the way that he compared himself to Keshad Johnson. So, there's that spot for sure.
There's
and then,
angle. There's that angle. Exactly.
Exactly. Right. So, I mean,
yeah.
He's very confident that he can kind of fill the void that Keshad Johnson is leaving behind. So put him in at the 4. But Tobe Awaka and Anthony Del Orso, just more backups at the forward and guard position. I mean, just reinforcements. We've seen, any given guy for Arizona can step up any given day. Having those players that can make big moments happen, it's important.
I wanted to discuss this with you specifically. We're with Jenna Fink from KVOA News 4 Tucson, the NBC station serving Southern Arizona. I wanted to discuss this with you particularly because you're such a good storyteller that Trey Townsend is not your typical transfer story. He had one Division I walk-on offer out of high school, not just one Division I offer, one Division I walk-on offer out of high school. And he said, he kind of alluded to the fact that Oakland head coach Greg Kampe sort of let him walk on as a favor to his dad. He had 1.5 available D2 scholarships. So this is a guy that never got the opportunities out of high school. He played his 4 years at Oakland. He had an opportunity with the COVID year to be able to transfer and play one more season. And, that's what he's coming to do at Arizona. How do these stories kind of fly away from the general narrative of the transfer portal that it's just guys going in to get the bag?
Well, that's exactly what, that's what so many of the stories center around now is, what is the NIL going to look like? What is, the social media aspect going to look like? Guys putting up how many offers they have and having announcements. For him, it's very much seemingly like he just cares so deeply about playing basketball and, wanted an opportunity. He did his 4 years at Oakland and just genuinely wanted a new opportunity to play. And, it didn't seem like any NIL, anything really mattered to him.
Right.
It just seemed like, where can I get the best opportunity to develop my game, improve my stock as an NBA draft prospect and just develop as a person and a player. And I think Arizona is a really great place for him to do that. And, I think you just get like a sense of genuineness from him where, he's going to be all in for Arizona basketball. And I think that's something that the fans are going to easily be able to get behind.
And yeah, exactly. It's the character of the individuals. And we talked about it with football too, with football and basketball, that people can get behind the individuals. People can get behind the stories. But we always got to bring kind of the realism into it because me, I'm a little bit of a reckless optimist. there's realism into it that how many times have Wildcat fans been hurt in March? Do you see
Fair enough.
maybe a little skepticism going into this basketball season of, okay, we saw a really good team last year. We saw a really good team 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what have you. Like, just get me to March and get me over the hump. Or do you see a similar anticipation building for the regular season schedule, the conference schedule with this new league in the Big 12? How do you see the temperature of the water for Arizona fans right now for basketball?
I think there is so much to be excited about in the regular season for Arizona basketball. I mean, Duke coming to McHale in non-conference. I mean, that's
And
gonna
Cooper
be fun.
Flag.
Yeah, that's gonna be so much fun. I've had that one circled on the calendar since Arizona went to Duke last year. As soon as that
Mhm.
game ended, I said, "All right, that's gonna be a great one for next year here in
Yep.
McHale." So that one, and then just Big 12 conference competition, Houston, Baylor, Kansas, all these teams that are so well known for men's basketball. Now Arizona is going to have all, tough tests in conference play. I mean, Arizona had its fair share of rivalries and tough opponents in conference, but, they won the regular season. They were projected to win the Pac-12 tournament. Obviously they did not, but, you know, it's tougher now. So I think,
Yeah.
it's a fun opportunity to kind of enjoy the ride. Everyone talks about March, and there's of course a lot of expectations for this team because of how well they are and what the ceiling is. But I think there's a lot of exciting matchups to look forward to in non-conference and in the regular season as well. So don't jump ahead to March, Matt.
But of course, it's all building toward the little
Yes, exactly.
the
That's
chimes.
exactly.
Before we wrap up here with Jenna Fink on the Bleav in Arizona podcast, I want to do what we do every show at the end of the show, the Bear Down Rundown, talk a little bit about what else is going on in Arizona athletics. And for this one, we'll stick with basketball and a couple former Wildcats for the Miami Heat in NBA Summer League. Pelle Larsson the other night hitting the game winner for the Heat for Miami in the NBA Summer League championships to beat the Grizzlies in overtime. He had 16 points in the finale. Over the course of the Summer League, those 6 Summer League games, he averaged 12.5 points per game, about 4 rebounds, about 4 assists. Keshad Johnson missed the last 3 games with an ankle injury, but he was really good as well, averaging 10 and 5 off the bench for Miami. So these guys feel like they really fit Heat culture and sort of unheralded players that can go and use their entire skill set in Miami to help them win games. What did you see from these guys in Summer League? And from what you saw from them last year at McHale and beyond, how do they grow their profile as NBA players? How do they fit the NBA game and continue to grow like some of these other Arizona alums have?
I was laughing because they've been in the NBA for about a month and they're already champions and already get a
Yep,
ring. So maybe summer league, but still, you got to start somewhere, right? Um,
exactly.
so, but yeah, I think Pelle Larsson, something we always saw from him, Mikhail. I mean, he was willing to put his body on the line to make a play, whether that was
Mhm.
dishing out a great assist or go into the hoop. I mean, he was all in, 100%, gave it all. And I think that's something he's already brought in to Miami. I think fans, there saw his scrappiness, his aggressiveness on that play. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe in Arizona, he would have passed that ball to someone else and let them take the shot, but he was aggressive and he went for it. And it paid off. And I think, he said afterward, like he just wants to do everything he can to help his team win. And I think, whether that's on defense, whether that's, 3-point shooter, going to the hoop, I think that's something that is of value to Miami and fits right in with the culture. And similar for Keshad Johnson. I mean, we know his story, going from San Diego State, growing up in the Bay Area, and now going to Miami. He's also one who's willing to do anything to help the team win. He improved his 3-point shooting. Great defender. So I think both of them, and their camaraderie too. I mean, they've played together now for a year. So, when they're out on the court, it was just plain fun watching them.
Yeah. It
As
really was.
as people who cover Arizona, like it was really fun to see them back out there having fun together and making plays. A couple times I saw, Keshad pass to Pelle and him score. So it was cool to see that connection. And I think, looking on Miami Heat fans, whether on social media, I think they've really kind of bought into what those two can bring to the team.
Yeah, that's huge. That it really is a huge part. And obviously, Keshad's exciting game was his 21-point performance, I believe,
Yeah.
in the third game of Summer League. I like what you said there, though, about these guys are willing to do it all for the team. And I think you and I are both college basketball fans, so we step into that mindset really well. But there's somewhat of for a lot of college basketball fans, not necessarily calling out Arizona fans on this, but for a lot of college basketball fans, there's almost a jaded sense a little bit about the NBA and about the individuality that comes with that. These guys, constantly looking for a 3-point shot or constantly looking for the step back or, will take the easy assist, but won't ring it around the horn. But these guys feel like as rotational players, and it feels like we saw it a lot during Summer League, guys are looking to come in and make an impact and not come in and be the guy. How much do Pelle and Keshad as players represent I'm going to come in and make an impact and help towards wins as opposed to I'm in it for me?
Well, they've, in my experience, just from me watching, have never come off as selfish players. They have always come off, even at Arizona, even, when they came in, just unselfish, willing to pass the ball, willing to play strong defense, do whatever they can to help Arizona win. I think that was something that, was fostered at Arizona last year, even more so. And I think they're bringing that with them to Miami. Like you said, their numbers from Summer League don't necessarily leap off the page, right? Their averages, I mean, they didn't average 25 points per game or whatever, but they were consistent. It was consistently having 12 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, whatever it was. Every time I would look at the stats, I was like, okay, it wasn't just points or it wasn't just rebounds. They were well-rounded, not necessarily the highest scoring player on the team, but they were well-rounded in everything that they were doing. And I think that just goes back to what they've said about wanting to be a team player, wanting to fit in and have success and help lead their team to success.
She mentions consistency. She's a picture of consistency herself. Jenna Fink, KVOA News for Tucson, NBC station serving Southern Arizona, joining us here on the Bleav in Arizona podcast. As we wrap up the show, I want to let you know that you can get your wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to Bleav in Arizona. That's Spotify, Apple Music, TuneIn, Google Play, I believe works now. And of course, on my YouTube page at Matt_Reynoldson. But thank you so much, Jenna, for joining us here on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here later this week to talk more Arizona athletics. For now, have a good one.